Hi, everybody. This is your old pal Hondo Carpenter, your Las Vegas Raiders beat writer on Sports Illustrated. It's great to be with you. So glad. I love training camp. But one of the worst things about training camp is you're so encapsulated in the bubble of training camp that it is 6 weeks of just boom, 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 your training camp reports every day. Now we're back into the swing of the season, and once a week for the next 46 weeks. He does it all except those 6 weeks of training camp. We're pleased to be joined by my good buddy, Matt Haladik. Matt is not only a terrific journalist at thespun.com, editor and publisher, but he's also a very dear personal friend of mine and love him dearly. He's one of the good guys, and I cover the NFL macroly, meaning specifically on a team. He covers it microly. I cover it microly. He covers it macroly. And so it's great to kind of discuss the world of the NFL from a Raiders perspective, but with somebody that covers the league in totality. So, Matt, it's good to be back with you, friend. I've missed you.
Missed you too. It's been a training camp grind, I'm sure, out there. So we appreciate you, having your nose to the grindstone for the Raiders.
All right, let's talk about the Raiders preseason because a couple of things stood out to me. And obviously, there's going to be changes from the initial 53 man. But if you count somebody on IR, 10 rookies made the Raiders roster, got several UDFAs. Last year, all the draft class made it. Last year's draft class with a bunch of UDFAs as well. When you look at the Raiders, you look at a ton of experienced veterans. Colton Miller is an elite. Andre James is there. You look at a Gardner Minshew, which I'm not calling him elite, but he certainly is a veteran. Zamir White is a veteran. Alexander Madison, Amir Abdullah, Devontae Adams, Jacoby Myers. You flip it around, Robert Spillane, Marcus Epps, Christian Wilkins, Max Crosby, all of that. But when you start looking at how young first rookies, second, and third year guys, it is amazing. Youth is served in the desert. I'd love your thoughts on that.
Well, I think it goes to show you that when you're building a roster, which the Raiders are doing, and you're in that building mode to become a contender, hopefully, you're looking for talent wherever you can find it. You're not always beholden to just bringing in outside talent or vets. If you find somebody through the scouting process that you like, you want to evaluate them further, you'll keep them around. I thought, again, the 53-man rosters are fluid. Every team makes a couple of changes after releasing the original one. Some make more than others, but the thing that stood out to me was a receiver. They're set with their top three, and then after that they have DJ Turner, who's been around for a while, as their four. But then the last couple of spots, they went to Ramel Keaton and Tyreek McAllister. So, that's Christian Wilkinson's guy who had been with the team for a while, or they had seen him play last year. Jalen Guyton is a guy who came with Tom Telesco from the Chargers, so he knew a lot about him. And those guys didn't make the initial 53. So I think you're looking at them saying, hey, we want to explore all options here. We're not just going to go by, pedigree or resume. If we think there's something there, we want to explore it further. We're not afraid to do something that might be a little bit unexpected.
I'm going to tell you a couple things that you just hit on that I think are important for us to disseminate. Is the top four wide receivers with the Raiders are completely set, and Jacoby Myers this offseason has been the best offensive player in the team. It's not even close. I know that the Patriots kicked themselves in the rear for letting him go. They wanted him bad. He has set himself up his next contract to be very, very big if he continues on the road that he is. The Raiders have used him at a lot of different places. I can't talk about some publicly because they haven't been shown publicly, as you know, with our rules of getting the access that we do. But he would be the third quarterback. But you look at him, you look at DJ Turner, amazing camp. You know what you got with Devontae. Trey Tucker's come along. And then it allows you, when you have so much certainty at those first four, that Tyreek and Rommel won those jobs, but it allows you to have the peace of mind to go with these UDFAs when you know all that you have in front of them. To me, that's the unique mix of young and old.
Certainly, and you're not having to rely on those guys to contribute in your offense right away. Your wide receiver 5 and 6, they'll if they play special teams, they're going to get action on special teams. They might sub in here and there in certain packages, but you're not going to play them a lot right away. So you can bring them along and kind of nurture them. Again, we could see them add more of that position before week 1. We'll see how these next couple of days of cuts and waiver claims play out. But I thought that was definitely one of the more intriguing aspects of their opening roster.
Yeah, I don't expect any changes in the wide receiver room at all. They're very, very happy with that. When you think about it, too, and I mean, they have an elite paid receiver in Devontae. Jacoby's paid well, but I think he's underpaid. And then you have Trey Tucker still on a rookie deal, second year of a rookie deal. That they're in good shape there. All right, I want to go in a different direction. I, as you know, did not know Tom Telesco prior to him taking the job with the Raiders. Gotten to know him well now. I feel like I've got a really good relationship with him now. But several of my friends who I trust, and you've been a longtime friend, I trust you. You didn't know him either, but people like you spoke extremely highly of him. So I was sitting with a member of the media in Costa Mesa, and they talked about Guyton's going to make it because he's his guy from the Chargers. I said, I think we're going to learn a lot about Tom Telesco on how he handles this. The fact that he went away from Guyton and kept a UDFA, he has a great relationship with Guyton. Him and Guyton are good friends. But the fact that he was willing to disassociate himself from a previous relationship for what was best for the team tells you a lot about the character and the integrity in which he's going to run the Raiders. What did you think when you saw that?
I would agree. I think that you see when new GMs, new regimes come in, there's always a little bit of a carryover from where they were previously. They'll bring in some vets or some guys that they had that they're comfortable with to kind of maybe help implement their system. If they're a coach or if they're a GM, they know that they're good quality locker room guys or guys that can contribute. That's just normal in the NFL. Where it can sometimes become an issue is if you're bringing in too many, or your regime, whether it's the coaching staff or front office, is too loyal to those players at the expense of some other guys who may merit further consideration for playing time or roster spots or whatever. I think it's a good sign right away that Tom Telesco wasn't afraid to release a guy who has a lot of experience in the NFL, a lot of experience that he's familiar with from being with him in LA. And he went with these 2 younger players that, the staff evidently really likes, and his staff thinks there's something there to be developed. So I think that's, a good sign. It's him not forcing his guys onto the roster or forcing guys on the coaching staff or him and the staff are aligned in that aspect. I think it is great. It's a good sign for the future, I think, for roster construction.
Last thing, and then I want to get to some other subjects, but when you look at the amount of rookies and the amount of very young players, first, second, third year guys, I think it says something about the relationship of Antonio Pierce and Tom Telesco as well. A lot of GMs come in, and if they didn't hire the coach, it's an acrimonious relationship at first. These guys are on the exact same page. They get along well. They certainly are not afraid to share their opinion with one another when they disagree, but their relationship is very telling. What do you think this initial roster said about their relationship?
I think that, well, to touch on the youth aspect, I think, again, like I said, the Raiders have a lot of established talent on the roster. I think guys that have been around a while and guys that have been in the organization a while. So that's a good place to start. Now, I think, again, like I said, when you're building out a roster and you're trying to reach that level of contender, you have to be, you can't be afraid to, look at a lot of different younger players and see what you have, and see if you can develop for the future. And I think that that's what they're going for here. Antonio Pierce is saying, all right, I know I can count on Max Crosby and Devontae Adams and Colton Miller and Robert Spillane and all those guys. Where can I find that next class of players that's going to support them? Where can I find maybe that one or two guys that exceeds expectations and maybe becomes a starter or becomes a long-term piece? So I think that it signals that. I also think, like you said, with the younger players, it's that carryover relationship where some of them who have been around but have only been around a year or two, he knows them and he wants to see what they can do under his regime. I think when you mentioned going to the new guys like the UDFAs or other rookies, he's leaving no stone unturned. And I think that that's a good way to go about it going into your first season. Again, we'll see how it plays out during the fall, but I have no problem with it so far.
When you look at last year's draft class, which was tremendous, and they're all here, and then all of this year, and you hope your first 5 rounders make it. Anything after that, you hope practice.
Mm-hmm.
And then you look at a second year of an all draft class making it with a bunch of UDFAs in both groups. And the fact he came in and inherited this scouting staff, that really tells you the depth of the Raiders scouting, the fact of his comfortability with the scouting staff. But you also can't talk about the success of that without also giving some credit to Dave Ziegler as well. Talk about the Raiders and the fact that they're stockpiling draft classes. That's a massive deal.
It gives you a lot of continuity, and obviously you hope that you're able to develop some of those guys into quality long-term pieces. Because listen, everyone wants to keep their draft picks, but if the draft picks can't really play, then you're just keeping guys around that aren't helping you. So, there's been promising signs with that 2023 group. Obviously, they want to, I think, see a healthy and productive Michael Mayer, more out of him this year. I think you want to see more at Tyree Wilson, I'm sure. You don't know quite yet what role Aiden O'Connell will have on this year's team. We know he's starting off as the backup, but will he take over for Gardner Minshew at some point? What is his long-term role in the organization? So there's still some questions to be answered, but I think the early returns are pretty good. And like you said, if guys haven't been automatically replaced or forgotten and thrown to the wayside at this point, that's a good sign that they're at least, showing something in practice, showing something in camp.
Right. I want to go in a little bit of a different direction, not, entirely different, but a little bit of a different direction. Let's talk about the quarterback race. I had been told that it was Aiden O'Connell's job to lose, that Gardner had to come in and beat him. Both quarterbacks had disappointing training camps, and not disappointing because they went backwards, but disappointing because neither one took a step forward. Mm-hmm. They knew what Aiden would do, or they thought they would, that he would just continue to progress because that's what he's done his whole career with the Raiders. And so that their belief was, hey, Gardner's got to come in and beat him. Well, he didn't. And both guys just kind of stayed where they were. So they gave it to Gardner, but it wasn't like either one really won it. My thought to you is twofold. First of all, what did you think of the race? I think they did fine, but because neither one really won it, I think Gardner has 4 games for sure, but I would not be shocked if we saw Aiden this year. And I'm not rooting against Gardner. I'm just saying, since nobody won it, we can't have a whole bunch of expectations otherwise. That's the first question on the quarterback race.
I think the approach was fine. I think going in, you had a guy coming back in Aiden O'Connell who started your last 10 games. Saw some of him. It was his job to lose. And I think they brought in the vet with a lot of experience who started a bunch. Uh, Thinking at worst, he's capable backup. At best, if he does beat out the incumbent guy, that's a good sign. So the process I thought was fine. The results, I listen. I'm not there day to day. I saw some of the Raiders preseason game action. I read your reports and other reports coming out. I do think it's a little concerning, like you said, that nobody really sees the job. That they both kind of were just like, they didn't really say, Aiden O'Connell didn't take that step forward where you think, hey, maybe we found a potential starting quarterback long term. Gardner Minshew kind of, it seems like was who he's almost always been, which is a guy who shows some flashes, who's good enough to be around and play in the league a long time, but isn't a guy that you feel comfortable trusting your franchise to, trusting, your offense to long term. And the funny thing is, and I know we're going to probably do predictions and stuff like that at a later episode, but I'm noticing a lot of negativity around the Raiders in terms of people thinking, they'll go under their 6.5 win total for the betting, or they don't think they're going to have a very good year. And I think a lot of it stems from the quarterback, because when I look at their roster, it's really not a bad roster. Is it a roster of a Super Bowl team? I don't think it's a roster of a Super Bowl team, but I think it's a roster that you can make the playoffs with. But I think the concern is at quarterback, and the concern is, okay, how does Antonio Pierce handle being a full-time head coach, which are understandable. But I do think the quarterback race, if you want to call it that, or jog, maybe it wasn't necessarily a race. It was this kind that has led to, I think, a lot of people looking down on the Raiders, maybe more so than they might deserve, because people really aren't confident about it. Outsiders aren't confident about either player.
All right, so let's stay on that vein for a minute. I am a believer that past performance is indicative of future expectations. And while both quarterbacks were disappointing in the preseason, we know, look at Aiden O'Connell, the last 5 games of the year, 9 touchdowns, 1 interception, playing at a very good level. We know Gardner, where he played last year, was an alternate in the Pro Bowl. My point is, to say the sky is falling because both quarterbacks were disappointing, I think is a little bit of clickbait, because both guys have a proven track record of success in this league. I think it's fair to call it a disappointment, but I certainly think somebody will step up just based on past performance. Do you agree with me? Do you think I'm taking a too optimistic of an approach? What do you think? What do you believe when you think about the possibility of how this falls out?
Well, I think, like you said, Gardner Minshew probably gets the first month or so, gets the first few weeks to see how he's playing, see how the team performs. If they're winning, I think you stick with what is working, unless they're really winning in spite of him. But then you might turn over to Aiden O'Connell. I still think long term you're better off playing Aiden O'Connell more, because at worst he's a cheap backup for the next 2 seasons after this year that you feel comfortable with in the system. But you got to if you think Gardner Minshew gives you the best chance to win now and start fast, you have to start him. So I think there's a possibility, I think one of those guys does seize the job. Maybe Gardner Minshew turns it up a little bit when the lights come on. Maybe if he doesn't, and you do go back to Aiden O'Connell in week 4, 5, or 6, whatever, maybe Aiden O'Connell now, knowing that he's got the opportunity, he's not competing, he doesn't have to look over his shoulder at the moment, maybe he kind of seizes it and runs with it a little bit. So I do think one guy will step up at some point this season. I'm not sure just quite yet who it will be. I will say this. I know this. The worst case scenario is for the Raiders is if what happened in training camp continues in the regular season, where it's kind of like, well, after 4 or 5 weeks, you're not really sure about Gardner, and maybe you give O'Connell a chance, but O'Connell doesn't really seize the job, and then you got to go back to the veteran. Uh, if you're playing musical QBs during the season, that's a surefire way to have a bad year.
Totally agree. All right, let's turn to a couple other subjects around the NFL. Lamar Jackson is a guy that I just like what he can do in a football game. But you guys had a quote recently from an NFL coach, an anonymous quote, but I know your standards, that said, he can't pass when he has to. I mean, I think that's been a universally known truth about him. If you're going to beat Baltimore, you have to shut down the run and force him to throw, and that puts your team in a good spot. I would like you to expound on that.
Yeah, and just to be clear, that quote was to Mike Sando at The Athletic, and he did his annual quarterback tiers list, which I think is one of the most fun things to read every year. And I know he's his reporting is definitely legit, so he's got it's a strong quote there. It's not just something
Right.
from a nobody or something that's fudged around. I think that's it's some people when people say like I'm talking about fans. When fans argue on Twitter or whatever and say, "Oh, Lamar can't throw, he can't pass," that gets dismissed because it's not true. He can throw. We've seen him make plays with his arm. We've seen him throw downfield. Some of the pre-draft stuff about him not being able to throw or not being accurate was just kind of like surface level stuff that was not true. We know he can throw the ball. The issue is, can he beat you with his arm when he has to? And that's what they have to rely on. Now, thinking back to that AFC title game, I thought the Ravens kind of abandoned the run too early. I thought they should have tried to run the ball against Kansas City more. But in order to beat Patrick Mahomes in the playoffs, which nobody really seems to do, I mean, the only people that have beaten Patrick Mahomes in the playoffs are Tom Brady and Joe Burrow. And in the second time Brady beat him, Mahomes was a ragdoll because his line couldn't block. And, Burrow, the Bengals defense played great that game, and he was able to throw when he had to, and they won. You have to be able to, in the playoffs, you have to have a quarterback that you could say, you got to win us the game. Because there's going to be at least one game in a playoff run, 3 or 4 game playoff run, where you're going to have to say to your offense, your quarterback, you got to win it for us. That is where I think there's still going to be doubt on Lamar Jackson until he proves it. And here's the thing: the defensive coordinator said, because I got the quote right here, he's a 1 with limitations for me. So he's putting him in tier 1, which is elite quarterback. You can win a lot of games with him. When you watch it against Kansas City, he can't pass when he has to. That is still true. But he is still a wonderful football player. I think that's kind of a fair assessment. I honestly do. I think that he's a fantastic football player. I think he's probably the 3rd quarterback in the NFL. I would put Mahomes and Allen 1, 2, and I probably would put him 3. So he's definitely elite. He's an MVP. He's a Pro Bowler. He's all those things. But he also happens to play in the conference which is loaded with quarterbacks and has the best quarterback in the world that you have to beat in the playoffs. And there's been issues with him in the playoffs when he has to be that guy. Can he do it? And I think you're going to see those doubts until he proves he can do it. And the other thing is that defensive coordinators want to keep him in the pocket or rely on him throwing, not because he can't throw or he's completely inept. That's not true at all. But he's so much more dangerous if he gets in the open field or breaks contain and gets out and can beat you like that. They'd rather pick their poison of making him try to beat them with his arm. And sometimes in the playoffs, we've seen him have trouble with that.
This is how I describe Lamar Jackson. I think he's a very good thrower when he's not put in a throwing situation. But when teams know he has to throw, that's where the struggle is. In fact, you'll see him tap the ball a couple extra times, almost doubting himself a little bit. But I think he's a great quarterback. I thought that was a good quote and a good article you guys had. All right, this is not really football, but there's going to be a lot of football people in it. Are you as excited as I am for Happy Gilmore too?
It's funny. I was looking at it, and a lot of times remakes or sequels, you're like, oh, they really need to do this over or whatever. But I think it's gonna be fun. I am. I think it's 28 years. I think Happy Gilmore came out in '96, so we're talking about it's 28 years now. The film's obviously not out yet, but there's been a lot of talk about it. I do think Travis Kelce's going to be great in it. I think that's a good fit for him. His sense of humor, his personality. I'm definitely going to check it out. I haven't watched the original Happy Gilmore in a while, so maybe I'm due to rewatch that too. But I'm definitely going to check out Happy Gilmore too whenever it drops.
Happy Gilmore is one of those go-to movies. Anytime it's on TV, I just can't let it go. All right, I want to turn attention now to New Orleans, where, in the interest of full disclosure, I consider Derek Carr a friend, have a very good relationship with Derek, but he was not overly impressive in year one in New Orleans. And I got a call yesterday from a media member. I'm not going to say who down there. And he said to me, "Do you think Derek is thin skinned?" I said, "No, I don't think Derek's thin skinned." I said, I talked to him about when Josh McDaniels got here. He didn't necessarily relate to Josh's philosophy where everybody gets chewed in front of the team because John Gruden had done it privately. But I said, I don't think he's thin skinned. And this media member told me that they believe that this media member believes the reason Spencer Rattler was not named the backup was because they thought it would, and it's still up in the air, but they thought it would impact Derek's confidence. I found that interesting. I'm not saying I agree with it. I've never known Derek to be thin skinned, but I thought that was fascinating. Do you think Dennis Allen, who's on the hot seat,
Mm-hmm.
in fact, I'm going to just say it, I don't think Dennis Allen's the coach in New Orleans next year, period. But do you really think with a coach in jeopardy, he's going to not make a decision on a backup based on rattling, pun intended, his QB1? Your thoughts?
It seems far-fetched without knowing the details there.
Yeah.
Again, I'm not on the ground in New Orleans covering the team every day. I will say this, because one of my coworkers at the Spun, Christmas Vogel, is a huge New Orleans Saints guy, has his own podcast about the team and covers them in depth. And I know he's excited about Rattler's potential down the road. Now, here's the thing. If people would Dennis Allen think that, well, if Rattler's number 3 and Jake Haener is 2, people are going to be less inclined to call for Haener to take over for Derek Carr if Derek Carr doesn't play well at the beginning of the season? Maybe. Personally, we know how fans are. I think if Derek Carr struggles the first couple of weeks, fans are going to want Spencer Rattler, whether he's QB2 or 3, because he's played pretty well in the preseason, and everybody always wants to see the backup or the young guy with potential. If they, I'll say this, if they did make that decision partially based on that, it's probably not a great sign for Derek Carr going into the season or a great sign for the Saints going into this season. But I don't know. I can't say for certain that, they did that for Derek Carr's psyche or anything like that.
Yeah, it sounded far-fetched. It sounded to me like someone on the team was kind of leaking to this media person to give the team cover. And hey, let's blame it on Derek since everything else. But I'm going to tell you this, having covered Derek for the Raiders, you said, hey, if he gets off to a bad start, if he throws the first pass,
yeah, you're right.
I'm just telling you, I know how it works.
He's
one of to Bill Belichick. Now, in the interest of full disclosure, I love Bill. I respect him. I like him. Every dealing I've ever had with him has been so rewarding. His metamorphosis, he's on everything now. He's on the Pat McAfee show. He's got the young girlfriend. Just talk about Bill Belichick. I mean, he's living the life now, isn't he?
I think every time I've seen him on media appearances, whether it was College Game Day last season or if it was this, any stuff in the offseason, the NFL draft, McAfee, he's always seemed really comfortable and at ease with himself, and I think he's been pretty entertaining. So I'm looking forward to see what he has to say analyzing the game during the 2024 season. I do know this. He is going to be the subject of endless rumors throughout the fall because there are 3 teams in the NFC East whose coaches, I think, are on varying degrees of hot seats going into the season. Every team, but the only guy that's safe, I think, right now is Dan Quinn with the Commanders because he's in his first year. And look, you look at the other 3 teams, the Giants have had a bad decade for the most part. We know the affinity John Mara has for Bill Belichick and Bill Belichick has for the Giants franchise. So he's going to be linked to that job if they get off to a bad start and Brian Dable gets fired or is rumored to be on the hot seat. The Cowboys, Mike McCarthy's going to have to do some winning in the playoffs, I think, to last to 2025. We know Jerry Jones would love to have Bill Belichick come in, and that would be a dream for him. And Dallas actually is a team that I think is ready to win in 2025 if Belichick were to come out after a year away and coach. And then lastly, you have the Eagles, who I think probably win the NFC East. But Nick Sirianni's on a little bit of a hot seat after how their season ended last year and some of the ongoing feud with, Jalen Hurts and things like that. And I know people will talk about Bill Belichick as a candidate for that job if it opens up. So he's going to be the subject of a lot of rumors. And in the meantime, he's going to be on TV or podcasts or YouTube, whatever, breaking the season down for all of us. So I think it's going to be interesting. It's going to be fun.
Where do you think's the best fit for him?
I know it's a made-for-TV soap opera, and
Don't say it.
But the football-wise, the best fit is probably Dallas out of those 3, because Bill Belichick is in his 70s. I don't know exactly how old he is off the top of my head, so I don't want to say the wrong year, but he's in his 70s. Would he want to go to Would he want to go to?
Do you see who that was?
Yes, Stephen A. Would he want to go to the Giants and really have to undertake a rebuild at this stage in his life, this stage in his career? Philly would be interesting too, but Dallas would be. The floating Stephen A. head is getting me. Dallas, I think they have a lot of talent on the roster. If they do re-sign Dak Prescott long-term, they have a proven solid quarterback long-term. It would be the best fit from a football standpoint. The only issue is would Jerry Jones entrust him to make a lot more decisions? I don't think I think that's where the problem would lie.
I think he should go to the Jets or the G-Men.
That would be a lot of fun too, because the Jets are interesting because of how his situation there last time it all exploded and everything. I don't think he'd ever go there. It would be some redemption story though. It would be hilarious. So I do think the Giants.
I don't think he would go to the Jets either, by the way.
No,
I'm just saying.
I think he could go to the Giants because even though there were reports that he didn't like the structure of the Giants front office or thought it needed to be modernized or changed, I feel like with the and this is just me going off reading the tea leaves and kind of knowing and knowing some things about the organization. I do feel that if there's one guy that John Mara might trust to change up the structure or revamp or do different things differently, it probably is Bill Belichick. So I don't know. As a Giants fan, I don't know how I feel about that because to me, it gives off vibes of the Knicks with Phil Jackson. He's a former franchise legend, a guy that they wanted to hire for a long time and fans clamored for because they thought he would finally turn things around. And then when he got there, he was a dud. So I am worried about that with Belichick because he's at the end of his career because he's older. But I could see the Giants making that move.
Last one. What did you think of Jerry Jones' profanity laced? I mean, I I literally thought when I first saw it, I was watching the Pat McAfee show. And by the way, has Pat not just become much watch? You just, if you're a sports guy and you're not watching Pat McAfee every day. So Pat's reading his statement. I'm thinking, oh, Pat made this up. It's kind of a parody joke. And then he goes, I'm not making this up. That's literally Jerry. I was stunned, not because I don't think he talks that way. I've been around him. But the fact he did it publicly and on the record was, what did you think of that?
I think it's funny. Now I understand why a lot of Cowboys fans, a lot of my friends who are Cowboys fans, roll their eyes and they feel like, this franchise, even though they win a lot of games in the regular season, even though they have a lot of talent, we know about their postseason struggles. It's why a lot of them feel like they feel almost like it's something's going to go wrong now with Jerry there, because he's just is like, he's become bigger than the team almost. And he's become sort of, he doesn't give off the stable, longtime owner when he talks. He kind of gives off this sort of rambling, erratic, older dude. And we saw with the CD Lamb, some of his comments earlier in the summer. I guess they did get the deal done. I think everyone kind of assumed they would get the CD Lamb deal done. But he made it a little harder than it needed to be by misspeaking or speaking foolishly or whatever he did. So, I understand why he drives Cowboys fans nuts. I do.
I got to tell you, what stunned me was NFL people telling me this deal should have been done months ago. They were so close, and they just could not believe it didn't get done. All right, Matt, so good to be back with you. Next week, we're going to review our season predictions. We'll get into all of that. Great to see you. He is Matt Halatic of thespun.com. Make sure you're checking him out on a regular basis. Matt, tell everybody real quick where to find you on X.
You can find me, and a bunch of Raider fans have already, started following me on X, Twitter, whatever you're calling it, at Matt Halatic 919, at MATTHLADIK 919. And I'm always there, and I'll be tweeting a lot about the NFL on Sundays this fall. So, anytime you want to interact, just stop by.
Great to talk to you. That's the great Matt Halatic.